Right, welcome everyone. My name is Iris Williamson. I run the gallery, the New Harmony Gallery of Contemporary Art. Thank you for being here. I am really happy to have you all here to also see this exhibit, which is called Visualizing Spaces, which was presented to kind of build on some of the themes of social alchemy and work with these themes around utopia, what is utopia, and all of that. So I'm going to give a quick introduction about the exhibition as a whole, and then I'm going to give some introductions to our artists here and ask a few questions. But feel free to grab snacks if you need it, and hopefully we'll have a few more chairs soon. So we'll see how it goes. And then at the end, we'll have a short time for questions. So this exhibition, Visualizing Spaces, features work by regional and national artists, Robert Bernier, Sue Che, Nasserine Khan, Diego Morales Portillo, Brenda Mallory, Sarah Noah Mark, Deb Sokolow, and Jamie Stam. And the exhibition opened on March 12th and is up through April 23rd. This exhibition asks a series of questions building around the idea of new harmony and its legacy as a utopia. So these questions include, what is this space that we occupy? How did it get to be how it is? The landscape, the built environment, the people here, and the terminology used. What is sacred here and to whom? What should have been honored here that has been in fact honored or disgraced? And what has been honored here that actually deserves it? What happens when we hang on too tight, and what happens when we let go? Who belongs here? Who is utopia for? Building on New Harmony, Indiana's history as the location of multiple utopian experiments, Visualizing Spaces examines themes around the search for utopia. The exhibition anticipates and engages the hopes, myths, failures, and fallouts which occur in pursuing an ideal reality. Abstracted landscapes, impossible architecture, and resource materials serve as both critique and creation of an idea of place. Centering around the question, who is utopia for, Visualizing Spaces recognizing the past as what is lost, the present as what could have been, and the future as an imagined world for all. And then I'll introduce our artists here. So Nasserine Khan grew up in West Africa and Indonesia. Her mother is Filipino Chinese and her father is Afghan Russian. Her work wrestles with the gendered faith of her childhood and asks how the feminine divine can be celebrated. She often finds herself exploring the feminine appetites that her early faith asked her to restrain. Her art gives her the space to explore her diverse histories and traditions using African symbolism or South Asian patterns. Most recently, she has been working in wood, burning, carving, and painting it, drawing on the tradition of wood carving she observed in Indonesia. By using natural materials found here in Indiana, she explores what it means to be an immigrant artist. What does it mean to make art with the earth-based materials of this new country while drawing on the strength and artistic traditions of a land left behind? And then Jamie Stam was born and raised on the edge of the Everglades in Broward County, Florida. She's a craft-based artist currently residing on the western banks of the Mississippi River in St. Louis, Missouri. Her work focuses on preserving Florida's environmental and queer history in the face of climate change. She uses a craft-based practice to tell these stories. In the spring of 2019, Jamie received an MFA in visual art from Washington University in St. Louis. She was most recently the recipient of the 2019 John T. Milliken Foreign Travel Graduate Award, a Regional Arts Commission grant, a Critical Mass grant, a Dubinsky Scholarship to study at the Fine Arts Work Center, and the Frida Kahlo Creative Arts Award from Washington University in St. Louis. Her work is featured on the cover of the December 2016 issue of Poetry Magazine and in the spring 2021 issue of Candy Floss Magazine. Jamie has shown in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Chicago, and throughout the St. Louis regional area. She is currently showing at Revelry Projects in Buffalo, New York. She's an artist in residence at Acre in Wisconsin, the Site International des Arts in Paris, Aquarium Gallery in New Orleans, and SAPTA in Tennessee. Jamie is an artist in residence at Craft Alliance and a resident teaching artist at Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis. She is represented by Revelry Projects in Buffalo, New York. Thank you so much. There are a lot of people. Leslie should be drafting. All right. Well, unfortunately, I do have a lot more people than we expected here. That's a good problem. And that bench warm. Yes. Okay. This is so much. All right.
People, please go sit on that bench. Settle down.
Yeah. All right. All right. So I'm going to keep this actually pretty conversational, but I think that we just wanted to start with a couple broad, open-ended questions to the artists, just to kind of talk about their experiences and what their the idea of utopia means to them. So, Nasserine, do you mind sharing a little bit about what you think about what utopia means to you?
Yeah, sure. And actually, I was discussing this with the big heart folks over breakfast, but I think all of my work, just like every facet of my life, is impossible to talk about unless we talk about immigration. So I came here at 17 alone. I moved to New York City. I was newly divorced and I've been married for 1 year and I had no money. All I had was a scholarship, which was wonderful. I had a scholarship and which was more than most people. So when I talk about utopia, I have to talk about immigration because there's nothing in life as an immigrant that doesn't get touched by immigration. So even driving here, I had to, it was very kind of Shante to allow me to bring a guest because they have to drive me because my green card is expired. And so I can't renew my license. And because I can't renew my license, I can't renew my passport. And so on and so forth. Like I can't drive to Chicago to go renew it. I have to have like someone drive me or, you know, take the bus stops. So even driving here is touched by immigration, or where I work is determined by immigration. I work for a wonderful Unitarian church that says we do not care about creed, status, gender identity, or immigration status, and so we just won't ask you for it. But I literally cannot work anywhere else. I love where I work, and that's wonderful. But what if I didn't love where I worked? I cannot leave the country. I can't take my son to go see his family. Every month that I've been applying for a green card, I have to have a piece of documentation for every month for the last 10 years that shows that my son's father and I are in a genuine relationship, that we're not scamming the system. So 10 years, every month I have to have a bill, a joint account, a photograph, a love note, a prescription for birth control, literally anything. So when I talk about utopia, it brings me back to utopia, it's the same thing. There's this elevating of utopic plot lines and dystopic plot lines in the popular imagination of the American literary landscape. We talk about The Walking Dead, we talk about Katniss Everdeen, what's that?
Oh.
You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
Hunger Games.
Hunger Games. Others as shows and books, right? But that's fun. It's fun to imagine this total collapse of society and what might you be if all identifying characteristics were stripped from you and that's all you had. What's not fun is immigration. And I'm one of the lucky ones because I grew up very wealthy, I come from privilege, I speak English. So when we talk about utopia, we are so fascinated with it as a culture. And we're so fascinated with it as academics and writers and artists. But we forget that there is actually people seeking utopia, like currently, every day. And they clean our houses and make our beds and, do our oil changes. And so we want to think of utopia and dystopia as this high-minded academic ideal, and it is. But the people who are doing the most high-minded thinking about it are not us.
Jamie, can you tell me what utopia means to you?
Yeah, I feel like kind of very, very loosely playing off of what you said is coming from a background of I feel like utopia has always been in the viewpoint that has never been accessed. So I was raised Jewish, still Jewish, I'm queer, and I feel like for as long as Jews and queers have existed, utopia has never been for us as an other. So I feel like it's this complicated view of I was thinking about it on the drive here, what is utopia? Do I believe in this? I don't know. I think it's good to have dreams, but I question things based off of if they're built upon these ideal things that don't exist, or maybe the path to get there is a little bit complicated. But I don't know, in my mind, to be very brief, I think it's important to have difference in order to get to better places, to have conversations, to understand, because you can't just erase everybody's background. Everybody's coming from such specific stories and lineages and part of such unique, diverse communities that I think it's important to have those differences in order to be able to see beyond that, and find community and preserve that and find safety and empathy. Yeah. In a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so building off of that, that's kind of our lay of the land. That's the ideas around this town. That's the ideas around the show. The ideas around the conference. What does this mean? What do we think about space? What do we think about place? What do we think about our bodies in these places? And the exhibition thinks about this from a lot of different ideas. Both of your works have different kind of points at these themes in very specific ways, but both very, very different ways. And I was just wondering if, Nesreen, could you talk a little bit about how you really think through specifically the ideas of utopias or place or belonging or world building with your work specifically? And this is also her work in the show is this piece here, and then the piece on the back wall with the bird there.
I'm so sorry, I'm getting so distracted.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. In Indonesia, you have to apologize all the time. And if you don't apologize, you're considered very rude. So I'm trying to drop the habit since moving to the US. So I do it twice on my
That was very polite, though.
Yeah, so world building and visualizing space around the art. I think I'm very conscious of where the pieces of wood that I work on, their provenance, as it were. So I'm a single mom. I have a 6-year-old son. He's a real hoot, and we live in the hood. Like, we live in a neighborhood where they used to measure the homicide rate by the square foot. And so if you look at a heat map of Indianapolis, Hogville is on the west side, and then Brightwood is on the left side, on the east side. And those are both the most violent neighborhoods. And I love it. I find it inspirational and sacred and divine because of many things, but mainly because I think a place gets a hold of you and it doesn't let go, and that's just different for each person. You can't say this is why, or that is why, or that it's going to work for everyone. Hogville to me is the place where all this inspiration, all of this, the west side, I guess, is where all of it flows from. So that also plays into the idea of the built environment. And so because it's the hood, right, there's just not a lot of green spaces. Indianapolis has lovely parks, but not on the west side, right? So for example, this piece here is called Mermaid of Mars Hill. And Mars Hill is a neighborhood on the west side of Indianapolis that is very, very impoverished. It struggles with the opioid epidemic has really hit it hard. It has a very low median income, and it's largely forgotten by most of the city. And so during the pandemic, a friend of mine and myself used to go and visit the homeless encampments that line the river, because there's a train track, again, built environments and the idea of like where this stuff comes from. There's a train track that goes straight from Mars Hill into downtown Indianapolis. So the homeless encampments line the river, and then they can walk the train track directly into downtown. So when COVID hit and all the restaurants shut down, their morning commute was fairly moot because there was no restaurants or commuters or workers to feed them. So they kind of were just along the river. So a friend and I used to go and deliver meals and water, and we would get to know mostly men that lived there. And so as we started talking, I would say, do you need anything else? You know, they would want toothbrushes, but the other thing they asked for a lot was art supplies. They wanted notebooks and pencils. And I find that all the time with people that live on the street. They're asking me for things to write with or draw with. And so as we got to know them better, they would say, oh, you're a wood carver, oh, you're a wood burner. So they would keep stacks of wood that they would pull from the river. And so this, I can't remember if I pulled it or if one of the guys pulled it, but it's very special to me because it's collaborative, right? Community comes to us in so many different ways, and you can't have utopia without community. And often the dystopias of our lives are broken communities. And so this is from Mars Hill. It's pulled from the White River. I don't exactly know what wood it is. If I had to guess, it'd be oak. It's some kind of hardwood because despite quite some time waterlogged, it's held its shape and holds detail fairly well. And so the kind of the idea of it is that she's a fossilized mermaid, like a creature that has died in the pollution of the White River and has adhered to this piece of wood, which is morbid, but it's also, I hope it pays homage to the men that live along the river, because I love the New Yorker. I read it every Sunday. I love following ecologists and scientists, but nobody knows the tides of the White River, its fluctuations, the plants or the wildlife that lives along it better than these guys. They're the ecologists we should be listening to. If you want to talk about prophecy and ecological inspiration, it's these guys.
Jamie, I'd like to ask you the same question. I mean, this is, obviously there's so many broad themes, but I'd like for you to speak specifically to some of your work, the theme of utopia and how it shows up in your practice.
Yeah. My two pieces are the two text-based prints. So a lot, just as like a little brief overview, all of my work centers around preserving Florida's queer and natural histories in the face of climate change. So I grew up in South Florida, spent 18 years of my life there, and could not wait to get the hell out. But then like I moved to Georgia and then to Chicago, and it was like the further and further I was getting, the more I realized how much like Florida was a part of me, and I couldn't separate myself from it. Like I became obsessed with it, and every year I feel like it grows. And now in St. Louis, where I live, I'm almost trying to recreate it as this, I feel like it's this really sad, depressing, perpetual memorial to like what's going to be lost, what me and a lot of other people get to bear witness to, in that like, specifically the house where I grew up will be going underwater. It is in a very vulnerable area of Florida. So like the whole state sits on top of a giant aquifer, and aquifers hold water. And when more water gets put into the aquifer, it doesn't have anywhere to go but up. So it's like not just coastal flooding, but interior flooding as well. So I feel like in my practice, I'm trying to recreate these things and create objects that I call relics. What would be found in the future? Like what is lurking inside of the deepest, darkest chambers of an aquifer? What are the objects being preserved and kept sacred and safe from humanity or just destruction? Of course, I rambled so much, I forgot my thought. But yeah, so I feel like the work that I've been making, I want it to be celebratory while talking about very heavy topics. So I often take things that are very recognizable, like Florida's flora and fauna, whether it's like alligators or palm trees, kind of luring people in with these very colorful things, but using those things to talk about very dark histories, such as I made a quilt that's talking about the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, where 49 queer people were gunned down inside of a club. And I feel like Florida only started to care about queer, well, a little bit after the fact. And now, I don't know, I feel like my work every day, I feel like I can't not talk about these two intersecting histories, because I feel like the way Florida has been treated in terms of its natural landscape has been completely destroyed, demolished, altered in ways where I'm even amazed that the plants have learned how to like work around us. Like waterways have been choked off. And I feel like the same thing has happened to the queer community, where it's been like left, kind of picked, poked, prodded, parts that people enjoy, and then when they're unhappy, they just kind of toss it aside. And I feel like nobody cares until the fire is burning and there's nothing left. So I want to take that and, I don't know, create something that everyone can see, and hopefully everyone can draw stuff for, because I know like, while Florida, and specifically Florida queerness, Florida nature is important to me, I know there are aspects of these things that can be found all over the world. And while I may not be talking about them, I feel like everyone can find a little nugget to relate to. And with talking about this, the importance of visibility with these two intersecting communities, I feel like is more important now than ever, especially with all the legislation that's been like, I don't know, exploding across the country. I feel like every day it's like a new bill to like, you're not allowed to talk about queer families in schools. It's not about like teaching like queer sex really in first grade. It's like, hey, sometimes kids have two moms. That cannot be mentioned anymore. That is not allowed to be talked about in the classroom. And these things are not new. Like in the 50s and 60s, there was legislation in Florida that specifically went after queer teachers. It's just, I feel like the same patterns repeating, and then everything that's happening with trans kids not being allowed to exist, access vital healthcare. I feel like all I want to do now is just make work being like, we're here, we're not going anywhere. You can't stop us, just like with nature. we're always gonna be here. And we'll just find ways to like grow and develop and thrive,
Yeah.
so.
Something about that agency that's really interesting, and I actually think you both talk about that, where, you know, there is kind of a way of finding ownership, or a way of like, you know, claiming a space, or being able to find that in a certain self. I know that you talk about this piece here with talking about access to beaches,
Yeah.
and also thinking about, you know, it's just this larger question of like who belongs where, or how do we think about these things?
Yeah,
And
like-
so-
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, like with these two prints in particular, I feel like when I was making them, I had this thought in my mind of like, who is the beach for? And it wasn't, I mean, at one point in time, sure, it was for every living creature, but then like as people started taking control of specific places, taking over certain spaces, like they were designated for certain types of people. Like take Miami Beach, for instance, it's paradise, it's great, like who doesn't want to go there? But like you go back to the 60s and people of color were not allowed to be on the beaches. They were allowed to come to Miami Beach to work, but they were not allowed to be on the same beaches as white people. And just the thought of like gay beach, and I love going to a gay beach. I feel at home, I feel safe, I feel fine, but it's like the fact that a gay beach even exists is so freaking annoying to me. Like, why do we have to be designated to one silly little area? So when I was making these, I actually wrote these thoughts directly into the sand. And just the idea of embedding these words into sand, and therefore it became part of the sand's history forever. Therefore making the beach for anyone who touches it. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, that's also kind of thinking about working with, you both work with the natural environment in a really beautiful way. You both use these, there's also kind of an aesthetic of like a lush paradise kind of through it, which I don't know if that was the initial goal of it, but I think that kind of speaks symbolically of looking for space, or looking for something that's built or that emerges out of it, maybe even aside from the built environment. Like there's ways in which you can control space, but then there's something that's also uncontrollable. It's our alarm. I'll let you all talk about it. So that was an idea, thought about the natural environment specifically. I know that materiality is a big part of your work, and you shared a little bit about that before. Is there, can you speak maybe a little bit about those personal connections?
Yeah, sure. So, the piece in the back with the parrot is on persimmon wood. So Indiana persimmons are a native tree. And this persimmon tree was milled by the White River Parkway along the White River on the west side. So my friend Jerome, who's an arborist, and his girlfriend Leslie gifted me that piece of wood. And so much of my work is on scrap wood, A, because I'm poor, and B, because I enjoy it. I don't know if it's because I'm stingy, and so it feels good to like use trash.
That's not stingy.
The most recent pieces actually have been pulled from the big car scrap pile. And it's been really nice. But yeah, so this is on Indiana persimmon wood, and this is pulled from the Mars Hill section of the White River. But I think that the thing that intrigues me about wood particularly is what we were talking about in terms of wildness, and sort of uncontrolled fervor. So I've dated a few arborists. I have a thing for wood, like trees. So a former partner of mine, who's an arborist, told me about barber chairing, which which is where a tree falls over, and the fibers have such tensile strength that if they don't crack all the way and it snaps back, it can like decapitate or delimb an arborist. And so arborists are very concerned about barber sharing. And so like that connection to wildness and the like raw strength of wood in its very fibers is very attractive to me. So I've had quite a few career changes. So most recently, I was a college English professor, and before that, taught history and other things. But prior to that, I worked in strip clubs. And so working in strip clubs, you have kind of this unbridled view of like what human wildness looks like and what it means to be in a contained environment where understandings of respectability, understandings of class, understandings of sexuality and of gender have different rules. They don't play by the rules that we set up for ourselves in academia or in church. And so that's what attracts me to the wildness of working in WOOF, is that it doesn't play by the rules ever. You know, I work with really dangerous equipment. I have custom wood burners that have been made by a friend of mine who's an electrician, and so they burn at over 980 degrees. I use a glow box, I think is what it's called. I'm not an electrician, I just have generous friends. But it basically starts the diesel engine of a semi truck. So if I'm not careful, my tiny jewel box of a house goes up in flames. And I can really hurt myself. And I enjoy that connection to the wood, right? Because there's something honoring about it to use lots of force and power to then honor the piece of wood that you sourced from wherever. And so it took me a long time to talk about my background as a sex worker without shame. And now I don't feel shame about it. I feel like it has made me a better teacher, it's made me a better lay minister, it's made me a better partner and a better friend, and it has definitely made me a better artist because it has asked me to think about the spaces that we inhabit and what the forces are within those spaces, what they exert upon us, what is the forces exerted upon us. And so you can either become the kind of artist that is a barber chaired tree, ready to snap back and hurt an arborist coming to clear up the mess, or you can become any of the other ways that we work with wood, right? Furniture and bonsai making. And I know that seems like a really trite and saccharine analogy, but I truly do feel that way.
Yeah. Jamie, do you have any other, I mean, you work a lot with craft materials and things that are really, I mean, we have the 2 print pieces here, but you also have a lot of, you work with beads and sewing materials and all of that. Could you share a little bit about how that is part of your practice as well?
So I feel like these are very unusual for what I normally do. So technically I am a trained printmaker, like I majored in it. I've been in the printmaking field for about 10 years now. So these are definitely like connected to what I make, but my true passion is with sewing and embroidery, specifically hand sewing and beadwork. So I feel like this kind of goes into like the materials we use in terms of like their value, or like, you know, it may just be a scrap of wood, but it's like an incredibly valid, important piece of scrap wood. That's kind of, I feel like, how I felt about what I was doing my whole life, what my grandma taught me, like how to sew, make toys, make bags. I never really viewed it as art. And when I was an undergrad, I was like, oh, that's not real art. I'm going to push this aside. And I wasn't seeing those examples like in museums or being taught in classes. And it wasn't until I got to grad school that I realized the value and importance and just like realness of it, and the importance of handiwork, and the ultimate importance of the passed down knowledge of how to do these specific crafts. So I feel like the pieces that I make are rooted in these lineages of like, my mom, she didn't necessarily do it, but my grandma did. her mother, going through the whole line. And it was just like, you know, a way to show love, a way to show care. And I feel like making specific objects using these materials is the way I can express my love best. I may not always be like the best with words, but I can make, I can sew, I can bead. And it's just, I don't know. I also find it very therapeutic. I struggle pretty hard with anxiety. And I find beadwork and hand embroidery to be very, very soothing because I can just focus on each little stitch, each little bead, like one at a time, and just zone out and get these really heavy topics off of my chest where, you know, also involving shame. Like for a very long time, I was really embarrassed to be Jewish and to talk about it with people. Yeah, I grew up in a place where I was just like maybe one or two Jewish kids at my school. So I felt like, oh my God, we don't celebrate Christmas. Like, ooh, don't look at me. And it's only been recently, like specifically within COVID, that I've come to terms with that shame and like how to talk about it, how to start incorporating it into my life. Yeah, and I feel like the objects that we use, there's a reason why we're attracted to them. Like they speak to us. I feel like almost second nature in a way. And like your work, working with wood, working with these pieces that you view as collaborative with other people, with these, you know, almost as you call them, like the most important like ecologists that we have that know the land. I feel like these people that don't get valued like them, like my grandma, like they know best. They always know best. And so it's important to listen. So I feel like my materials have given me that space to like listen to things and just create.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
I think I just thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
I truly hope that the pieces of art I make listen well.
Yeah. And I feel like you listen to them, you work with them, you don't force them to be anything they're not supposed to be, like especially with that piece. Like I feel like
Thank you. That's so
oh, no, my God, it's true. It's true. Because I feel like from a distance, it seems kind of unassuming, but when you go up to it, you see like what your hands did to it, like how you got to experience the wood, interact with this object that like you know something is, but like now you're a part of its history and you've given it a whole new life when it might have just been seen as like a piece of trash or something else. Like it's important what you do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to talk about risk for a second, if that's okay. I think with Utopia, we talk about, the idea of Utopia is the search for this good thing, but it's so risky. I mean, look at the history of New Harmony with 2 utopian experiments that are now described in your Wikipedia. 2 failed utopian experiments. Were they failures? I don't know. Probably not. Just because they don't still exist doesn't mean they're a failure. Which is the wisest thing anyone said to me post-divorce was, it's not a failed marriage, just because it ended. And I think that's so wise about Utopia also. But it's very risky, right? To go and seek something new and something perfect is risky. To seek something good, even in a friendship or a relationship, is risky. And maybe that's what, can't speak for you, but many artists that I know, and myself included, I think we are hoping that our art seems risky. But it doesn't just seem risky, but it's actually risky. And by risky, I mean, like, perhaps has a vulnerability where you risk judgment and risk exposure. And a friend who's known me for a long time was saying, you know, you were the most paranoid sex worker I've ever known. You got tested every month. And I really was. I'm incredibly paranoid because I was a nun at the same time. And so the same thing with the wood, right? Is you have to know the material you're working with and you have to make it your practice, right? So like with this, I completely have like coveralls, have a heavy duty respirator, have a suction fan, because Mars Hill is deeply polluted. Like the water is sodden with chemicals. It's almost viscous instead of liquid. So if I'm carving this and there's sawdust flying everywhere and you're breathing that in, it is truly like a physical risk. And so I think that's what I find most compelling about the idea of utopia is the risk. There's the risk of failure, there's the risk of broken community, there's the risk of deep judgment, there's the risk of rejection. And perhaps that's what I seek most in my artistic practice, is that I risk well.
It also speaks to these ideas of shame that you were talking before, we both speaking of that and moving through that. There's opportunity for transformation or good possibility in that space. And I think that that is when we're seeking for change or seeking for the idea of utopia, whatever that might be, there's always, like you say, that risk, but that vulnerability, but it's a transformative process. And with working with that through an art practice, that is one way to kind of seek these, these spaces.
And I think a lot about the idea of transaction, because when you make art for a living, it feels cheap sometimes to be like, I made this thing, can you buy it? Right? It feels bad sometimes.
Oh, no.
For me.
Get over it.
I don't know, get over it. Sometimes.
It's like a delicate balance.
I sometimes wish I could have like a man of affairs to like walk the words elsewhere. But I think that the thing that's helped me get over that is thinking through transformation instead of transaction. Maybe if I'm slightly different after the act of creation, maybe the viewer is slightly different after the act of viewing.
Yeah, 100% yes to that, like absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel like all I want to do when I meet someone who likes a piece of my work, I'm like, just take it. I know it. Like if it brings me joy, like, that's it for me. I mean, unfortunately, that doesn't
Yes.
but like, so I feel like now I have two kind of different practices that coexist where I have my more like, here are little tiny objects, I think like fun wearables or patches. Whereas like, I feel like my more studio based stuff, I'm like, let's see what happens. Like this is, I'm not making this with the intention to like profit, but more just like impart thoughts and like share ideas and just, yeah. But I liked what you were saying about, kind of going back to what you were saying about risk, about like just putting yourself in these very deadly situations to make something that feels right. I know like beating, I'm not at that much of a risk, but you know, putting your ultra vulnerable thoughts out there, I feel like is incredibly risky, and talking about deep personal stuff is also risky as well, because you just don't know. And I feel like with what I do with craft, with sewing, with embroidery, I feel like I'm already coming into the game at like a place where I'm not being viewed the same way as like, I don't know, someone who does like traditional painting does. Like I'm already being viewed as just like a craft artist. And I'm like, well, why can't craft, why do we have to have this? Like, why does it have to be a separate category? Why is it like just in the basement of the museum? Why can't we be like up with everybody else? Like, is it because it's like traditionally been women's work? I don't know. But yeah.
These are a lot of good themes. I feel like we touched on a lot of different things, but I do want to open it up for additional questions. It could be about your practice, or it could be some kind of idea that sparks some ideas. But yeah, does anyone have any thoughts or ideas?
Camera shot. The question I have is, do you see that the whole idea of utopia is also within and our own idea of what utopia means to us personally, individually? Certainly it's community. Yeah, I'm not discrediting that, but do you also see it as, or what are your thoughts on the idea that we're all searching for utopia within ourselves. You know, not just within community, but within ourselves. And can it happen in community if we don't have it within ourselves? If we don't recognize that the utopia within us? I don't know.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thought. That was one of the thoughts I was thinking about on my drive here. And like, I feel like I have my own personalized vision of utopia. I feel like everyone does. Like, it's like the dream of what you want. And I feel like when anybody asks me, like, where do you see yourself in the future? And I'm like, honestly, I just want to have a farm in the middle of nowhere. And it's like rescue animals and it's like me and the animals and my partner. And that's it. Like, that is my version of utopia. And I feel like it may not be the most like community driven, but I think definitely finding utopia for yourself is important. It's what keeps you going. You know, that desire to like find the thing that truly brings you joy and peace. And then I feel like you can spread that. And if that is with other people, great. If not, also great. Yeah.
It would seem to me that utopia is not, whenever you talk about it, it almost sounds like you're talking about heaven or something perfect. And that, I don't think that's its actual definition. It also means nowhere. It means a community attempting to do something together willy-nilly, whether it's going to work or not. And even though I've been here for 16 years now, I still haven't really studied deeply this notion of the intentional community, which is Manna, the side professor, has followed for a long time. His intentional community is also really compelling. I know for me, I grew up in a small village, beautiful little village, which wasn't well, yeah, maybe it was about Feminist Methodist meeting camp with that. But you know, then going to art school, talk about intention, and then I went to Cranbrook. That is an intentional community. And then I began to realize, you know, that was what drew me here. You know, this idea that not only had people set out with intention to be here, but the people who are drawn here, not necessarily the ones who grew up here, they're like, oh yeah, that. But those of us who have imported ourselves here, there's something about this idea that we can have an intention with each other and have our happy ring and, you know, share ideas. This is really compelling. And whenever I begin to feel dispirited by it, by the fact that we're all human and there's people who are really crummy out there and, you know, people who don't care about any of this idealistic stuff or art or anything, and yet, you know, they're my neighbors. You come back to your own motivations for finding community, and you realize it's perfect, the community is perfect, and you learn. I mean, for me, my mantra has been get along with everybody. Just don't judge people for who they are. It's really hard, but that makes me happy, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something harmony oriented. And there's also this cosmic thing here about the ley lines, the magnetic forces underground, which some of us feel deeply. Do you feel those? I'm bringing you in.
It depends upon what channel I'm on.
Not possible.
The short answer is no. I would like to, it's like religion. I'd like to believe it, but it hasn't happened yet. I haven't had that experience.
I have. And I've
And
seen
that-
people
that's it. I haven't seen a ghost either. I'm open-minded, Rick. But it hasn't happened. I wanted to ask Nazreen a question. You seem like this incredible character that has tried lots of roles, lots of outfits, lots of experiments. And I would love to know whether you're going to continue that trajectory in life, or whether you found something in wood that says, I'm here, I've landed in the boat that I'm going to be in. This is where I'm going to book passage for the next
who knows how long, but in a way, maybe your personal utopia is finding a practice that works for you on so many levels. So I wonder if you could imagine what you're 10 years from now, 20 years from now, are you going to still be in love with wood? Or can you give yourself license to chuck that all and do something else?
Yeah, no, you're like voicing my like deepest like insecurities. Like, why can't you stick with anything? Yeah, I really only started painting during the pandemic. And then immediately just started it. Except for wood, like painting on wood. But I was painting like canvas traditionally, and the reason I started painting was because of I lost my job as an art teacher, and I was feeding my son eggs from the backyard and zucchini from the garden every meal. And so I literally call it paint for your life. And it paid off. I got some big commissions, did some big murals, got back on my feet financially. And then there's something about canvas that feels like zucchini and eggs. But yeah, I don't know, is the short answer. I had a very transitional childhood. My father's from Pakistan, and he converted to Christianity at 16. And his family put a fatwa on his head, so we moved a lot. And then I went to boarding school, and you move in and out of a boarding school room every semester. There's no stability or continuity. And then I came to the States, and there wasn't much stability or continuity. But I have this deep desire for stability and continuity, and I think you hit on that very perceptively. Is that, yeah, perhaps that is my own personal understanding of utopia, which is stable community, stable work, continuity of some kind of spiritual and artistic practice that has continuity. And I'm very attracted to stability. I got married very young, so that I'd have the same person to spend with every holiday with. I had a baby at like 21 because I wanted to like build a family, right? I wanted to build stability. And like by 22, I found out that's not possible. Like you can't build that. It just has to be. But
I didn't mean
yes.
to get too personal.
No, it's fine. Obviously, I'm a chronic overshare. But in terms of the artistic practice, I have commitment issues. So even you asking, like, do you think you've hit upon this? I don't know, but it makes me jittery to think about if I
you
have to
can be
commit to it or not.
Committed to being a kaleidoscope. You
I
don't-
like change.
you
Yeah,
don't
I
have
do.
to commit to that.
It's what part of yourself you bring to those experiences that open you up. That's what you're committed to.
Well, I will say it feels most like the practice of home. So fun.
I have a question for each person, but I think they're vaguely related, so, for Nazreen, I don't know if you have any relationship to this, I studied gamelan for a long time, which is Indonesian music, and one of the things that I really like about their music is that if you walk from one village to another, they'll be playing on like totally different instruments, and they oftentimes build instruments out of their environment, so bamboo and sometimes they can just like wire and rocks, and it's a really gorgeous music. I didn't know, does that have any relationship to how you're finding materials now, or is it just, or is that just coincidental in a certain sense? Like, I don't know if I'm putting a map on it. And then the other one for you, I think, that ties back into her theme of displacement, like being obsessed with Florida, but not actually moving back down there, and I was curious why that is a thing that you're doing when you can very easily just like, I mean, not maybe
No, no, no.
economically, but like you can get in the car.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, so I've actually been asked this question quite a bit, and it has crossed my mind that I would love to move back to Florida, but like also moving back to Florida means like having to be like, you know, front row to what's unfolding. And like every time I go back, I feel like I do it in small doses, like I do like a week or two, and it's great. I like get to cover all my bases. I do my like research trip, which is just me spending time in the Everglades or going to the beach, collecting sand, or just honestly taking in like the smells and the sounds, trying to create this record of it. But the only thing that's really holding me back is knowing that, like, even just talking about it, it makes me really sad. Like, knowing that going home means going home to not only Florida being a perpetual dumpster fire of like with its government, but just like also what's happening to the landscape. And like every year, you know, the tides come in further and further, and I just don't know if I have the emotional capacity at the moment to be there for that.
Yeah, so it's like hard to make work about the thing that's happening. You have to take a step back.
I have to
and
take
make
a
the
step
work
back,
that-
yeah, and I feel like the more distance I have, the more clarity I have, the more power I have behind my decisions.
Your question about gamelan, I remember gamelan and wayang kulit, the leather shadow puppets of Indonesia. I remember those performances from my childhood pretty vividly. So they play gamelan all night, and then wayang kulit, which are these huge, sometimes small, carved and sometimes burned leather puppets in very stylized imagery, drawing from Hindu, Arab, and Malay indigenous cultures, practices, and religions. And the play goes all night. So it starts at dusk and it goes till dawn. And they play gamelan through the whole thing. And the puppeteers, it's very hard to be a Javanese puppeteer. You have to know all 7 levels of Javanese completely fluently, because you have to be able to play each individual character of the wayang kulit, the leather puppets, convincingly. And so Javanese is a hierarchical society, so they have 7 levels, each level of language for a different space in society. So if my mother was to speak to me in the 4th level, or to speak to me down in the 3rd level, I would speak up to her in the 4th level, and so on and so forth. So do I draw on those performances? The short answer is not consciously. I love wayang kulit, and I definitely draw on the patterns and color schemes and literature of the Ramayana and those parts of my childhood, but not the gamelan, yeah. The visuals, but not the music.
Yeah, I thought I might have been putting a map on it, but it wasn't there. Like, I was kind of curious about that.
Any other questions?
Can you just come live here?
Only 2 hours away, so.
Well, thank you all for being here. It was really wonderful to think through some of these ideas with the artists. Thank you for joining us and for attending.
Thank you guys so much for this.
Yes.